Hey, what's going on everyone? Today we're going to go over some set 11 comps that you want to be playing in the PBE. In case you didn't know, you can play the new set already. You just need to download the public beta environment and anyone can do it. But I'm just going to go over a couple of comps that are decently interesting. We have some 1, 2, and 3 cost reroll comps. We have a couple of standard leveling 4 cost comps. And right now they're not going to be tiered or anything like that because they are adjusting PBE and patching it every single day, or at least multiple times a week. So let's play these comps. Let's try to see when to go for them, what to do when going for them, and things like that. Because obviously there's no ranked mode on the PBE. I like using it just to kind of like learn more about the new set before it finally comes out, and then hopefully that should make climbing a little bit easier when it does. But we have Lux, we have Storyweavers, we have Kha'zix, Ghostly, Inkshadow Kai'sa, Alune, new TFT champion, Aphelios, Dryad, Duelist, Bard, and Arcanist Warden. So in case you don't know what any of these are, check out my other video I did earlier this week that pretty much covers every single thing there is to know about set 11. So starting off with Lux Reroll. Lux Reroll is going to be a 2-cost reroll comp. She's just going to use mostly a lot of generic ability power items. Stuff like 1 mana regeneration item, Jeweled Gauntlet, pretty decent. And then Nashor's does help her cast a bit faster. Lux is probably going to be one of my favorite comps this set, because in case you didn't know, she throws spirit bunnies at enemies. So obviously we got to put this comp first right now. What she kind of reminds me of from the previous sets is maybe something like Vex. You just want her to cast a lot, she throws her things out. There's a small CC on it, and overall it's pretty good. After you get Lux kind of going and get her to 3-star, you'll want to focus on a lot of 3-cost champions after that. So things like Alawi, Amumu, and Zoe make a lot of sense. And also 3-starring Nico isn't the worst thing either. The reason why Alawi is a great tank though is that she just does a bit more than Nico right now. Right now when people are playing Arcanist, they really like the Warden frontline. Luckily, Amumu's a Warden and a Porcelain. Lux is a Porcelain as well. Porcelain kind of gives them a bit of attack speed, so that's why like the Nashor's is pretty decent. Just get her to cast like a bunch, especially with the Spear of Shojin. And then Arcanist, of course, just gives like a bunch of ability power to your whole team. But after that, throw the utility tank items on one champion such as Alawi, and then throw the pure tank items on Amumu, and you're pretty much set to go from there. If you do have the luxury of like rolling a lot at level 7, getting Zoe 3-star is great to have like 2 different types of carries. But mainly this one's going to stabilize around your Lux 3-star. After that, throw in more Arcanists and you should be pretty much good to go from there because you just want a lot of ability power items. Next comp up we have is Storyweaver Reroll. This is primarily going to be a 1-cost reroll comp. We have like a small how to play section down here. We'll fill out these sections more as we go along. Mainly by the time set 11 rolls around, we should have most of these kind of like filled out. But obviously right now it's just on PBE. Mainly it's just there to kind of test things out and see what's kind of going on with the new set. But this one's going to be a 1-cost reroll. You want to go deep into Storyweavers. So right now we have like Garen and Sivir as like the main carries. So obviously Garen's going to be kind of the main tank. Sivir going to be doing most of the DPS from the back. After that, we have the 2-cost with Riven and Zyra. So there are a lot of different things you could kind of go for in this comp. But mainly it's going to be tank items on Garen, attack damage items on Sivir, and then Zyra going to use all your AP items. But I'd say Zyra is a little more of a luxury. You want to focus mainly more on the Garen and the Sivir, because most of the time when you do this, you're doing a 1-cost reroll. But maybe there are other ways to play this. Maybe there are going to be some comps which focus more on Riven and Zyra. It kind of just makes a bit more sense to do Garen Sivir though, because one does pure damage, one is like a pure tank. Whereas Riven, she kind of has to like sustain a little bit. It's kind of like Riven from the previous set in a way, in that she like sustains a little bit with the healing and also does a bit of damage, but like it's not really the same as last set because she's a 2-cost instead of a 3-cost now, so the power levels are a bit different. But again, it's the start of the set. There are many different ways to play the game right now. I'm sure at some points there are going to be different things that are viable just because they're patching things so often, but definitely try this comp. Pretty fun, and it's really easy to do because once you get the base of your comp, all you have to do is add in more Storyweavers. Essentially what it does is like at 3, 5, and 7 Storyweaver, you get like a little bit of a bonus. So you get a supportive effect, you get a combat effect, and then you get another combat effect. And also you get some nice little HP along the way. Next comp up we have is the Kha'zix Reroll. So Kha'zix Reroll plays very similarly to the Sivir Reroll that we saw just before from Storyweaver. So instead of going for all the Storyweavers, you go for Heavenly instead. So you're most likely going to hit around like 5 Heavenly. And the reason why it's mainly going to be 5 is because it's going to be hard to hit the Wukong. So Malphite and Kha'zix are going to be your main go-tos. Malphite, the main tank. For 8 seconds, gain armor and attacks deal magic damage to enemies in a cone, so he's just going to be super tanky. Kha'zix is going to be doing most of your damage. Ideally, he's just popping people left and right, but obviously that's going to depend on what stage of the game it's in. After that, you want to add in like pretty much all the other heavenly units. That's going to be Nico, Kiana, Soraka, and I mean, eventually you do want to play Wukong. It's just kind of hard to just play around legendaries when you're going for 1-cost reroll, because that means you won't have too much gold to get to higher levels because you're going to be rolling a lot at level 5, sometimes even level 4 if you're in those situations. But luckily, you could round out the comp with something like Nico and Kindred after you hit your Kha'Zix and Malphite Power Spike. What usually ends up happening is that you hit 3-star Kha'Zix maybe around like mid-stage 3, sometimes earlier. Sometimes you hit it on 3-1. I mean, sometimes you even hit it on like 2-2 or something like that. But most games, it's going to be like around mid-stage 3, latest stage 4. And then during those rounds, Kha'Zix should be able to stabilize you a little bit, and then later on you add in the Kindred to get a little bit of a bigger boost in the late game. And then 4 items for Kha'Zix, just generic AD damage items with like some survivability. You obviously want some lifesteal, and you want some survivability, so things like Edge of Night, very, very nice. Also, since he like relies on his spell cast a bunch, Infinity Edge, very, very good too. Also, again, be sure to play like 2 Reaper. Reaper's good because they also gain critical strike chance. And you might be wondering like, oh, why do you overlap Infinity Edge with the Reaper critical strike chance? Well, when you do have the ability to critically strike from somewhere else, you gain like bonus critical strike chance on the Infinity Edge. So a lot of people have been doing this like starting since last set. So I'm assuming it's going to continue on into this set as well. But obviously a lot of different items work on Kha'Zix. You could build all sorts of stuff on him. Any generic damage item will do, or any like sustain or healing item as well. Next comp up, we have the Ghostly comp. Ghostly is going to be the first like standard leveling comp we're going to go over. This one is going to rely a lot on 4-cost units, so you kind of see the base of it already. Morgana and Kayn going to be the go-tos. I mean, if we just look at the Ghostly units, like whenever there's a comp with like 2 4-costs, generally going to be pretty good to go for, because it means when you stabilize around stage 4, which is like where TFT is mainly played a bunch, if you hit like one of them, you should be okay, right? Like maybe you're not like completely winning everything, but if you hit 2 of them, maybe you are. But like hitting one of them is good enough if you have like the right items for them. Hopefully they could stabilize you a little bit, and then you kind of build your team a little bit into that. For example, if you get Kayn, maybe you go a bit into Reaper. If you get Morgana, maybe you go into Sage a little bit. It really depends who you hit, and you build your team a little differently. Kind of reminds me of Pentakill from last set. If you hit Karthus, you play around the Karthus. If you hit Viego, you could play around the Viego. Obviously, if you hit both, great. But really, you just need like one of them plus like your cheaper units to kind of survive most of the fights. For Kayn being like a melee carry, obviously you want some lifesteal on him. And then some people are doing this sort of like sustain build, but you could also go pure damage. I think a lot of different things work here. In the backline for Morgana, my favorite item is Morello, because she just applies the damage to a lot of different people. She targets like the largest clump, so create a blizzard at the largest clump of enemies within range that deals magic damage over 3 seconds and chills them. Someone in my set 11 preview video pointed this out. This is like Anivia ultimate, so it's odd that it's on Morgana instead of Anivia, just kind of funny there. I guess the artwork works a bit better, you know? But since this is a Ghostly comp, just round out your comp with more and more Ghostlies. It's really easy to build a lot of these like vertical comps is what they're called. It's when you go really deep into a trait. You notice before we had like 7 Storyweaver, we had like 5 Heavenly. This one we have like 6 Ghostly. These comps are really easy to play because knowing what units to add kind of comes pretty naturally. You don't have to like mix and match that much. Of course you can. You could obviously drop down to 4 Ghostly and play like better units instead. Again, if we look at the Ghostly units, like maybe you don't want to be running Caitlyn in the late game, you know, or like maybe Aatrox and Shen, maybe you don't even want to run them in the late game either. You want to play like legendaries instead, because obviously if you like play a bunch of legendary units that are 2-star in the late game, that's probably going to be better than some of those synergies that you have earlier on. But one important thing to think about when you do play like duo carry comps is that you kind of want to split the items. So Morgana and Kayn are both your carries, so you don't want to build like all ability power items and then you get like too many of them and then you don't know what to do with your leftover items, because there are still random items in the game right now. So just make sure to kind of balance everything out. Also, this comp works really well if you get like a bunch of item augments, because you have like a ton of different item users. You want like a tank, you want your 2 damage dealers, so that's like 3 units you're already itemizing. So those types of augments generally perform decently on this comp. Next one up we have is Inkshadow Kai'sa. This is going to be a 5 Inkshadow build. You could obviously explore a bit more with like trick shots for some sort of Kai'sa build instead. Maybe you could do like 4 trick shot and then like a bunch of random tanks, that might work, you know. Again, it's PBE, things are changing all the time, so let me know in the comments below what type of builds you're trying out with Kai'Sa. What type of items are you putting on her? Are you just putting like AD items on her? Are you experimenting with like AP items? Who knows? Like anything's possible, right? But for me, like obviously AD is going to be a bit better because like you look at her stats, it's like AD scaling from wave damage is like a lot less from AP. The amplified wave damage scales with AD as well. So like, yeah, obviously you want something like maybe like a Giant Slayer, maybe like even a Deathblade. Pretty much anything with AD will do, you know? What do we have here? We have Giant Slayer, Gunblade, and IE. Yeah, she's a spellcaster, so IE does make a lot of sense as well. And if you have like a healing augment, something like Harmethys or something like that, you don't need like the Hextech Gunblade, and then you can build like triple damage item on her, you know? But going back into the comp, you want to use Nautilus as your main tank. There are a couple of different options though, but right now Nautilus is just one of those generic 4-cost tanks like we see a lot in TFT. He just provides like a bunch of CC, which is really good, so just like play him, throw a bunch of tank items on him, but there are probably a lot of other different ways you could play Kai'Sa. Maybe it's even like the flex comp. Maybe you go for like AD tree in terms of like your TFT builds, and then you could just play random tanks with like Kai'Sa, maybe flex her with a different unit. However, I will say the Inkshadow version is a bit easier to play if you just like hard force it, because you have a great item holder in the early game with Senna. Senna uses like the same exact items as Kai'Sa pretty much. And then you could also use Caitlyn too. But as we were talking about before, tanks are kind of flexible a bit because like in terms of 4-cost, like Kai'Sa is the only 4-cost in the Inkshadow trait. So you could use other stuff like Wardens, Bruisers, Behemoths. Any of those will work. Again, you have to flex a little bit. Next comp up we have is the Alune Invoker Reroll. Alune's pretty cool, just because like she didn't really exist before. But if we look at all the invokers, we have Kog'Maw, Janna, Alune, Annie, Lilia, and Azir. Obviously, it's hard to get to 6 Invoker, but maybe you have like the +1 Invoker augments, things like that. And pretty much what Invoker does, it just gives mana to all your teams, and then like if you get deep into the Invoker tree, it gives like bonus mana to the Invokers. So you pretty much just have like a free mana item. So what people did in the past with Invoker builds was they didn't build any mana items on their Invokers and then just built like pure damage. Things like Archangels, like Death Cab, Jeweled Gauntlet, things like that. Because you get so much mana already if you actually get to 6 Invoker, but sometimes it's hard to do. If you're not able to get it, building a mana item is pretty decent because it helps you cast a bit faster. Let's look at Alune's mana pool. It's like 60 mana, so every 4 autos, if you have a Spear of Shojin on her, it is going to cast. And also in the late game, when you do hit 6 Invokers, if you get the +45 mana, she just has to auto once and then she casts right away. So it kind of depends where you are in the game, I think, for the Spear of Shojin. I think the earlier on in the game, it's a bit better, but maybe later on you want like full damage on her. But there's a lot of different things you could kind of try out right now. It'd be interesting to see what builds are going to be extremely dominant once the set actually does come out. But after you hit Alune 3, actually we haven't talked about the leveling pattern yet. You want to do like a 3-cost reroll. Pretty much you want to get to level 7 as safely as possible. Normally around like stage 4-1 or 3-5 people hit level 7. And then slow roll for Alune 3-star. Slow rolling just means like rolling down to 50 gold every single turn. I have like a random video on like what slow roll is, if you want to check that out. And then as you're slow rolling, you want to identify a good time to like all in, which is like rolling all your gold down to 0. Just because like when you're close to hitting Alune 3, you just want to like spend the gold to get the power spike to save your health pool, because health is a very important stat in the late game parts of TFT. But pretty much after that, you want to focus a bit on 4-cost. Sylas, Annie, and Lilia, all very solid to like secondary carry or secondary tank. But as your primary tank, probably going to be Tahm Kench if you are able to get Tahm Kench 3. Tahm Kench is easy to fit in because you get 2 mythic champions when you go for Invokers. And then just adding in Tahm Kench, I mean, he's a tank and he's like another mythic unit. So it gets you to 3 mythic, which obviously provides a bit more tankiness to him. So that's why people kind of use Tahm Kench a bit. But let's move on into the next comp, which is going to be Aphelios Reroll. This is going to be another 3-cost reroll. This one's going to be Aphelios and Thresh. So pretty much the same leveling pattern as before. Get to level 7 as safely as possible. Slow roll until you hit like 3-star Aphelios and Thresh. Maybe you need to all in a bit. And you could also add in something like a Mumu to kind of complement the tankiness for your team, because you're also going to run Ashe, which is a porcelain unit, so you could just drop in a Mumu as well. Either tank is going to be good, you know, it depends what you're going to be hitting. But obviously, if you are playing like Faded, I think getting both of them 3-star is a bit better, just because of the whole like linking thing or whatever it is. which you get from like the faded buff. But obviously once you get to 5 faded, like all the faded champions get the bonus. So obviously like 5, much better than 3. But you have to play more units for it, so it makes sense. But pretty much after you itemize Aphelios, just put your items on Ash, whatever leftovers you have, and hopefully that lasts you until the late game, and then you can drop some legendaries in and do whatever you want with them. Next comp up we have is Dryad Reroll. This is going to be a Kindred Reroll comp, or like Kindred and Gnar as like the 2 main carries. So what I like about this one is that the core comp has a lot of like cost overlap. So we have 2 1-cost units, 2 2-cost units, and 2 3-cost units. That means when you're rolling at around like level 6, which you normally do for Kindred and Gnar, you're often going to hit your Kha'Zix, Rek'Sai, Yone, and Alawi like really easily. So your like core team, or like overall core team, is going to be like super duper easy to hit. Then once you get the 4 costs, you could obviously put them in. Like obviously you need the Kayn to get Reaper, because it is a pretty solid power spike for Kindred. One build that is good on Kindred is the blue buff. Like blue buff plus damage items is really solid because she has 30 mana, so blue buff drops her down to 20. Because what blue buff does is that it reduces your max mana by 10, so she just autos twice and then casts, which is really nice. You just get like a ton of casts from this Kindred really easily with the blue buff. So I think it's by far her best item. Like obviously Spear of Shojin kind of does the same thing, but it's a little bit different. Let's compare the two. So Spear of Shojin gives 15 mana, and you get 15 mana on auto attacks instead of 10, and then you also get 20 AD and AP. Blue buff gives 20 mana, 20 ability power, and 20 attack damage, but when you get a takedown, you deal 8% more damage for 8 seconds. So blue buff is obviously a lot better when you compare that. It just gives more stats, and it gives the same amount of auto attacks needed to cast her spell. So by default, like blue buff is just better than Spear of Shojin. But regardless, both are good. Like sometimes in a worst case scenario, you might just have to build a Spear of Shojin on her if you like can't get a tier for some reason. But obviously blue buff plus like 2 damage items is going to be the way to go for Kindred. After that, you want to focus on Gnar. Gnar likes a lot of like the bruiserish items, so just throw that on him. Like anything that gives him survivability, some lifesteal is pretty solid. And then who knows, maybe you could even do like a dedicated Gnar comp. That definitely is possible. By the way, all the comps we're listing out right now is not a comprehensive list. It's just some comps for you to try on the PBE right now, and there are like a gazillion other comps you could kind of play. How many champions are there in TFT? I think there are like 50 some, 60 some. Like there are a lot of different kind of champions you can kind of use to carry your team. The next comp we're going to go over is Duelist Reroll. This one's going to be a Tristana build. So Tristana, she just likes a lot of attack damage. So the thing about Duelist is that it is all about attack speed. So if we read the Duelist buff, Duelists gain 12% attack speed on each attack, stacking up to 12 times. When you have something like this, or you have a trait that gives like a ton of attack speed, you don't need to build like Guinsoo's Rage Blade. So that's like a mistake I see a lot of people make. They like stack a lot of attack speed or stack like a lot of one stat, whatever that one stat is. And generally you want to mix and match. So if you get attack speed from Duelist, you just want to stack her with a bunch of attack damage, because the way the math works out, it's just a lot more damage. That's why you see like an Infinity Edge, Last Whisper, Deathblade here. It's just like generic AD items. And your Tristana is just going to be hitting like really hard after that. If you want to learn a bit more about like those neat little things I'm kind of talking about with itemizations, you want to check out this link over here, Fundamentals of TFT. That's going to be like a video that covers that and like a billion times more. So definitely check that out if you have not already. It's kind of like timeless information as well. But you just want to do a 3-cost reroll pattern for Tristana, pick up Volibear, maybe even Diana on the way. But focus mainly on Volibear and Tristana. Volibear as a main tank, throw generic items on Volibear, and then Tristana as your main damage dealer with attack damage items. Next up we have is Bard Reroll. Bard Reroll is going to be a heavy mythic build, so just play all the mythics, 7 mythics, and you're going to do a 3-cost reroll pattern again. Focus on Tahm Kench and the Bard, because Tahm Kench is just like the mythic tank. So we look at the mythic trait. They're 2 3-cost units. Like obviously you go for both of them, right? Because it's the same cost level. It makes the rolling really efficient. After you get Bard 3-star, what you can do to like cap out your late game is maybe add Lilia as a secondary carry. You always need some sort of secondary carry with a lot of these comps, because if you're not like a melee carry, oftentimes you can't like raid boss your way as a backliner, because they're normally like susceptible to taking a lot of damage. So whenever you're playing like a frontline backline comp, which is just like a tank in the front line and a damage dealer in the backline, oftentimes you want like a secondary carry just to give your team a little bit more power. This is contrasted a lot with a lot of like melee carries. Some melee carries can just like 1v9 and the rest of the units do not matter, but it's really a case-by-case basis. The last comp we're going to go over is Arcanist Warden. So I mentioned this a little bit before. A lot of people like playing Wardens with the Arcanist as like their front line. And it makes a lot of sense because there's a lot of like random trait overlap through like Porcelain and things like that. So we have like Lysandra. You could use Lux before you get Lysandra because they both have the same traits. Lysandra is Porcelain Arcanist. Lux is Porcelain Arcanist. So you could kind of have Lux hold the items for Lysandra. Luckily, they use like relatively similar items. But the main carry of your comp is going to be Syndra. So Syndra is just like the 4-cost Arcanist, so whenever you have a 4-cost unit of a certain trait, it's mainly going to be like the headliner or whatever, you know? Like they're the face of the comp in most cases because they're generally the primary carry or the primary tank. In this case, it's the primary carry, and you want to focus your items a lot on Syndra, do a standard leveling pattern, roll down. Hopefully, like when you do a 4-1 roll down, you get like a Mumu 2-star, a Lowy 2-star, Syndra 1-star, hopefully, and if you're lucky, you get Syndra 2-star. And that's just gonna be a very powerful comp on stage 4. As for items, give her a mana regeneration item, some damage, maybe some healing as well. Again, she has 30 mana, so similar to the situation with Kindred, blue buff is just exceptional on Syndra. Her ability is actually pretty fun to watch, so if you have not tried Syndra yet, definitely recommend doing so. And that is going to be all the comps we're gonna cover. How many comps were there? I think there are like 10 comps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I guess 11 for set 11, right? That was not on purpose, but whatever the case, there are a lot more comps that are going to be added. This typically happens at the start of a set. More and more comps get added. Like there's definitely like right now a lot of other things to kind of try out. So let me know down in the comments what comps you're most excited to try. Maybe it's a comp that you saw here. Maybe it's a comp you saw somewhere else. Maybe it's a comp that you cooked up yourself. But that's going to be it for me today. Hope to see you all when the set does come out. I think it's like March 20th, but it's out on PBE right now, so you could play it whenever you want. But obviously, ranked mode is going to come out on the 20th. So that's going to be it for me today. Hope to see you all next time.